Have a listen to that target there, guys. An absolute digger for sure. It's coming up at around 85 to 89 on the VDI numbers. We're using a slightly modified park program, but that is without a doubt a digger. Have a listen again. But there's one reason why you probably wouldn't want to dig this target, and if you're using the XP Deus II on the newly released Firmware 1.0, there's a good reason why you wouldn't want to dig this target. Let's dig it out and I'll show you why. Now before I dig this out, I'm just going to show you that the modified park program that I'm using is using a frequency max of 40 kilohertz, iron volumes on 10, reactivity is on 2.5, audio response is on 7, discrimination is on 9.0, and the sensitivity is on 92. If you go into the silencer, it's on 6, 3 tones, and I'm using bottle cap discrimination with 0 notch at all. But there is a good reason why you wouldn't want to dig this, and I'll dig it out now and I'll show you why. There we are, guys, an old tent peg made of iron. It's quite a long target, and granted it's a misshaped iron, but that was ringing up in the late 80s where usually high conductive silver targets would be, and for some reason on version 1.0 it wants you to dig this out the ground. So before I begin this video today, I just want to explain this is nothing against XP. They're a great company. They make absolutely brilliant metal detectors. This is purely just some of the things that I have found wrong with the new version 1.0 firmware that they released very recently for the XP Deus II remote, the WS6 headphones and the WSA2 headphones. So there are some major issues with this one, and I'm going to go through it in this video, and it's just a kind of pre-warning to you guys that I don't think it's ready to be used yet, so try and revert back as soon as you can. Otherwise you'll do what I do and waste a whole day in the field digging iron when you could have been finding good targets. Okay, so today I'm going to be starting off with program number 1, general program. So it's important to mention at this stage that I'm going to be using PWM audio. I'm not a fan of full tones, so the things like the high frequency square audio and the normal square audio isn't really going to apply to this video. But guys, I'm sure there's plenty more videos out there if you want to listen to that type of audio, but I'm going to stick to the normal PWM style audio. One thing I want to start off before we go up and down the field is just that XP have released something in their settings which could change the way that this particular machine will react over ferrous targets. So what you're going to have to do is go into the options tag, then select settings, and you'll notice that XP have put a new setting in here. It's a new option, it's called ferrous target identification. Now, as custom on general program, it's actually turned off, and you can turn it on and off just by pushing the plus button here on the remote. One thing I think is really strange is that why would they have this particular setting turned off? Because what this actually does is it changes the way that the VDI numbers show ferrous targets. So for instance, if it was off and you went over something that was ferrous, the audio would still indicate that there was something ferrous there by giving you that crunchy, dirty, low sound. However, the VDI numbers wouldn't show any numbers for the Ferrous. That means that, unfortunately, when you're going around the field and used to, with any XP machine, be able to look at the VDI numbers and see them jumping up and down between 1 and 5 and 20, and then sometimes they would peak at sort of 70s when it was an iron target, it will no longer do that. It will just basically hide all of those low numbers and you won't see them. So every XP machine that's ever been released, and I'm going all the way back to like the Gold Max times and things like that, have always had target identification for Ferrous items. The Deus II is the only machine that's ever had a VDI display, and every Deus, or the Deus I, all the firmwares for the Deus I and all the previous firmwares for the Deus II have always had target identification for Ferrous items turned on. But for some reason XP have decided they don't want that on this particular machine and they've turned it off. I'm going to keep it on today because I want to basically see all of those little VDI numbers that pop up when I go over bits of coke and bits of iron. So let's turn that on now, guys, get back to the general program there, and we'll go up and down the field and see what sort of difference it makes. Okay, so I've got a target down here, quite close to the hedge, and it's kind of ringing through at about 83, but there's also a considerable amount of iron buzz in amongst this target as well. So have a little listen to this, guys, and see what you think. Now that to me screams iron, but unlike version 7 and version 6, this rings through on the VDI at about 83, which is quite unusual because what will happen is I've been walking down this field and this 83 just goes ding and it stops you in your tracks, and it's not until you actually go to investigate the target that you hear all that kind of buzzing and all the Ferrous kind of indicators in amongst there as well. So on the general program, nothing touched at all, just basically turning it on, going to program 1. It's a bit iffy as to whether or not you would dig that, and I think if you were a little bit less experienced, it's a good possibility you would definitely go ahead and dig it. So we've just had another target down here, quite close to the gate, and again, this one stopped me in my tracks because it came up on the VDI at about 83, but I think it's another iron target. Have a listen to this. Now I'm pretty sure that is a Ferrous target, but as I say, it's ringing up at about 83, 84 on the VDI, and it's fairly consistent as well, which I'm really not used to with the XP Deus II. But I think what we should do is possibly dig this one out, guys, and that way we'll know exactly what it is. So let's do that now. And there we have it, guys. It's a very small, rusty iron nail. Now, the Deus never ever used to ring up at all high numbers on small irons like this. You might expect it on a large iron that was buried quite deep, but XP have made improvements in version 1.0 to make sure that big iron at depth is much more easily identified. But I've never really dug small iron nails like this because they've never been ringing out at high VDI numbers. So yeah, it's a bit questionable so far, but let's give it another go. Hopefully it gets a little bit better. So we just did a little walk up and down this pasture field to get an idea as to what targets sound like on the new version 1.0 firmware. And it's a bit iffy, isn't it? I mean, the machine was just falsing constantly, and all of the little iron bits sounded really good, but when you sort of investigated them a little bit more, you obviously knew that they were Ferrous targets, because of course they were giving you that low iron grunt. So I bet you're all probably asking, well, did you dig them and what were they? The answer is yes, I did dig all of those targets, and to save you the hassle of watching me dig out all those targets, I'll just show you exactly what they were. So the really loud one towards the end was a rusty iron bolt or nail, and the next one was another small iron nail. So as I said, guys, this is my third time out using the 1.0 firmware, and I must say that the last time I went out I was questioning why it was falsing so much. It wasn't until I saw the sort of hype online that other people were having the exact same issue that I thought actually it might not just be the ground that I'm in, it could just be that the machine has now started to be far more sensitive and react entirely differently on small iron targets. I must say I haven't dug one big iron, so XP seems to definitely have sorted that out, but unfortunately the smaller irons now are almost as good as modern coinage, whether it's copper alloy or silver coins, so definitely a little bit of work there to do. But what happens if we tweak the machine and see if we can iron out some of these? Well, let's give that a go now. Okay, so I'm just going to go through some of the tweaks that I've made. I've done a couple of more runs up and down the field, and hopefully tried my very best to try and discriminate some of these smaller iron targets. So I've left the discrimination at 10. I've got 3 tones, they've just got my sort of tone segments in. I've gone to bottle cap 4, which I've never had to use bottle cap before, but does seem to be doing something. Notch turned off, and I've got the silencer on 2. And then going back down through the settings, sensitivity 96, I've got frequency on 24, iron volume on 8, reactivity on 3, audio response on 7, and back to discrimination there. And if you go into the ground balance menu, I've got ground stabilizer on 1. Important to note that if you go into the audio settings, I'm not using any audio filter. It doesn't do much for the PWM audio that I use. It's obviously designed solely for the square audio and the high square audio, so I'm not really using it, but I did try and put it on audio filter 1 to see if it would make any difference, but to be honest, it doesn't make any difference at all, so I'm just going to turn that back off. And of course I've got the Ferrous target ID on. So let's go over the same patch of ground I just went over and see if that makes any difference at all. So as you can see, it's quietened the machine down a fair bit, but there is still faulting going on. Now, I'm swinging it absolutely normally on this pasture field, and all of a sudden it will just bing, and you'll stop and you'll think that's a nice target. You'll stop, go to investigate it, and the minute you investigate it, the minute your coil goes over it one more time, it's iron. It's obviously iron. That's exactly the sort of target you're not going to dig, but for some reason it's just picking it up as you're swinging along the ground and stopping you dead in your tracks because you think this is a good target, but it isn't. So what we're going to do now is we're going to boost the silencer all the way up to 5 and see if that makes any difference on the same patch of ground. So we've done a few runs up and down the field with silencer on 5, and it's still falsing pretty bad. I don't know why, but it's literally just picking up all of the tiny little bits of iron and making you stop to investigate them a lot further. The Deus always used to, and I'm going back to even the Deus 1, be so good on iron. It would just push it out and you could discriminate out, and even if you wanted to hear it, all those little irony bits would just come up as a really low irony grunt tone. But regardless of what you change on this particular new firmware, you have to stop and investigate even the smallest of nail, because what it will do is it will ping up at quite a high VDI, sound really good, and then the minute you stop to investigate it, you figure out that it's just a little iron nail. So what I think we're going to do now is I've dug 2 pits around the same sort of depth. They're coming in at around 8 inches. I'm going to bury one of the iron nails that I've already dug up quite deep in that pit there. And then in this little hole, I'm going to bury another iron nail that we've just dug up, but it's going to be right next to a silver 6pence. So let's see how the metal detector will perform with a nice high conductive silver coin next to a horrible ferrous target, and let's see how it will react to a nice deep ferrous nail. See if we get that falsing with one that we've planted in the ground. So in this hole is the single iron nail. It's buried at about 8 inches, and let's see if it falses and what type of target it reads up. So as you can see, it falsed to begin with, and then the more times that you went over it, it realised that it was ferrous, and then obviously you weren't going to dig it. It had that nice low tone. But did you notice how initially when I went over it, it pinged through really loudly? That's something the Deus has never ever done, so it's quite unusual. But let's try the nail next to the silver coin and let's see what we can hear on that one. So that's pretty impressive. That's kind of, you know, the program changes that I'm looking for. It's actually got rid of the iron completely, and what it's done is it's picked out solely that high conductive silver coin. The problem I have is that if there's no silver high conductive coin next to the iron nail, it will make that iron nail sound good for a brief moment, but then once you get in there and investigate it, you suddenly realise that it's no good and you move on. So as you can see, the high conductive target next to the low ferrous target, the machine does exactly what it's supposed to do. It gets rid of that ferrous target and only really lets you hear the nice high conductive target, which was ringing in at about 86 on the VDI. The problem I have is that the falsing of small iron objects is something that XP has never ever done, regardless of its firmware or its machine. So I think there's probably a couple of little bugs to iron out. Maybe there's going to be a 1.1 hopefully soon, but yeah, that's just one of the issues that I have with the new firmware. But I am really pleased that it's still picking up high conductive targets at depth as well. It just means that you are going to spend a lot of your day researching little targets in the ground that usually you would just walk over. So just before I wrap this one up, guys, I just thought I would do a test with the big sort of rusty old iron chunk that I've just found in the field by resting it on the top of the field, running over it in the general program, nothing changed at all, and just see whether or not we would get falsing on it if it wasn't in the ground and it was sat on the ground. Now, I know for a fact that this is absolutely ferrous iron. There is no other types of metal in it at all, but let's just see how it sounds factory program on general. So that is exactly the sound and the issue that I'm describing, and it's really accentuated when the iron target is just sat on the top. But what we're going to do now is we're going to go into the general program and just change some of the settings to see if we can actually iron out that falsing that this little iron nail is giving us. So let's do that now. So there we go guys, we've made some changes. We've knocked the sensitivity right down to 91. We've bumped up the frequency max to 40 kilohertz, so it's using the entire range. We've put the reactivity on 2.5, and of course we changed the silencer so that it was on 5, and we also put bottle cap discrimination all the way up to 5 as well. That does seem to have done the trick. It's certainly picking it up as normal ferrous. However, on the previous firmware versions, you've never had to be so brutal in terms of actually boosting all of these things up to sort of iron out all of the ferrous targets. So it's quite interesting that now you've got to do all of these things just, you know, not to hear iron. Pretty much not really what we want. We just want to hear the good signals, but at least there's a way around it, and at least there's a way that you can get rid of that falsing. So just to give you another example, I've just dug out of the ground this rusty old piece of iron. It's 100% iron for sure, but when this thing was in the ground, it was giving me a VDI of 83, and it was a solid 83, and it sounded really good. But now that I've dug it out, I can see that it's just a piece of iron. But let's see what this sounds like on the ground, and then we'll put it back in the ground and see whether or not I can replicate what just happened. So before I wrap this video up guys, there's just one other little thing that I have noticed, and that's to do with the equalizer setting. I haven't tried this on any of the other presets. I've only tried this really in the general #1 preset. But at the moment I have got a coin on the floor which is a 1p, and it's ringing through nice and loud, and I've got the equalizer turned completely off on the remote. There you go guys, you can see that it's off, and let's have a listen to how it sounds. As you can see, sounds pretty much as you would expect a 1 penny to sound. But what will happen if we basically change the equalizer so that all of them are at the bottom? Now effectively this should change the audio quite considerably, because we've moved all of the different frequency bands and shifted them down by minus 12 decibels. Let's see what difference this makes. So I don't know if it was just me, but that equalizer did absolutely nothing at all to the audio. And you guys were hearing it through the speaker and through the headphones as well. And honestly, even if the headphones are on and you've got full stereo in both ears, it makes no difference at all. So I might be doing something wrong there. That might only work on some of the square audio formats. But yeah, that's another thing I think that they just probably need to have a quick look at, the guys at XP, and hopefully they can try and work it out and get a resolve. Guys, it's important to notice that this isn't a kind of dig at XP. I get that it's you know, still in development. Every firmware they bring out, it gets tested on different types of things, and then they release it. And again, you know, it's going to be tested and tested and tested by a much wider audience. They can't give every beta version to everybody and go, there you go, test it, because that's just not how these things work. But I'm pretty sure they are going to come up with a resolve of these little issues. And if you're watching this video and you're thinking, you need to do this, or you haven't changed that, or the reason why you've had these issues is because you haven't done this, please leave a comment below. I would love to know. But that's pretty much it for this one. I've got some detecting to do today, but I really wanted to show you guys just some of the little things that the issues I was having with the new version 1.0 firmware. But there are lots of pluses as well. You're not going to miss those high conductors. There's not a chance in the world. But you know, you might spend a little bit of time looking at the falses. And don't forget, keep that target ID for the Ferrous on. If you've used a Deus before, trust me, you've always had it on. I don't know why XP have turned it off. It's nice that you have the choice to customize it, and that's another benefit to the new firmware update. But yeah, you definitely want that on to be able to see the VDIs jumping up and down as you normally would. I get that a lot of guys would just listen to the audio, and that's absolutely fine, but a really good way to distinguish whether or not you've got a Ferrous target in the ground is to watch the VDIs jumping up and down. It's always been a little tell for me, and to have the Ferrous target ID turned off just didn't make sense to me, so make sure you keep that on. But guys, that's enough for this video. It's just a little one regarding the new firmware. I hope you've enjoyed it. Please consider subscribing below, of course, if this has helped you out. Plenty of other metal detecting videos on my channel. It's not all about the kind of ins and outs of every firmware update XP have done. And of course, if you appreciate the video and you appreciate what I've done today, drop us a thumbs up as well. Until the next time, thanks for watching.